Hello, everyone. Pat Mashanya here again. Welcome to my virtual lab classroom. I just want to show you something I've been doing with FLIPGRID that's really helped me add a real formative assessment piece to our remote and blended environment. I'm calling it Flexit because I need a gimmick to have my brain wrap around it, but a Flexit, in my mind, is a way to use FLIPGRID as a type of exit ticket or final summary or closure activity or even extension activity that allows me to see student progress or even flip the classroom. So let me talk to you about a couple of ways I've been using these Flexits to try to give an exit ticket to my digital activities. One way you could use a Flipgrid activity, or what I'm calling a Flexit, is make it a type of check on student work. This could be done in an English class. This could be done in a history class. This really could be done in any way that you're assigning students content that they're looking at asynchronously, possibly in a flipped classroom to prepare for our next learning interaction. So here I embed the Flipgrid into my HyperDoc. I've talked about this last time. You could check out my last video called The Wonderful World of HyperDocs for more about HyperDocs. And at the end, I'm asking students to read and react. It says, click here to access our next reading when your child is a psychopath. And on the bottom, click here to share your reactions to this article via our Flipgrid. And I give them some probing questions to consider. This works great as a reading check. If you're in an English class and you don't have that typical go-to piece where you ask a question of the students in class, perhaps you're worried about test security, this is a great question. It's hard to fake speaking to a camera for a minute or 90 seconds with any type of specificity, detail, and insight. So I use this to just really see what students thought and begin to prepare for the next class. I created this discussion group, this topic in my discussion group. I called it Going Psycho. And I have here their responses. And the responses allow you, if you click on one, it allows you to see the student. You could assess their oracy. You could see their presentation skills. It has a feedback tab, which is getting better all the time. You could customize it. You could record feedback if you want to speak to them. You could simply rate feedback on their scale. You could provide comments to them if need be. You could edit the rubric if you wanted to create your own type of metric there. But it's a great way to just do a simple check on students and see how they're doing and just keep a check on them to whether or not they're following along and doing the materials that you asked them to do. So that's one way that you can use our Flexits or our Flipgrid exit tickets. Use it to measure and hold students accountable for work they're being assigned asynchronously, especially in a flipped classroom, whether it's a reading, a chapter to outline, perhaps an article to explore. Instead of having them write something, just have them make a 90-second video. I mean, Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit. And if they can't say it in 90 seconds, they're either kind of shoveling something or they really don't know what they're talking about. So it's a real challenge, I think, for students, and it brings in the idea of oracy, presentation, and the ability to articulate ideas verbally, which is something our school has been thinking about for the last couple of years. Number two, and finally, for our little video today, is using Flipgrid or a Flexit as an extension activity to assess their work. Not looking forward to the next cycle, but as a closure piece and a formative assessment piece for what you've just introduced to them. So, in my last cycle, we discussed rhetorical appeals, Aristotelian concepts, ideas of ethos, logos, and pathos, uh, studies of rhetoric. And so we had our right now. We went through a Nearpod. I had to do some exploring, where they watched some videos, read an article, and then I had them apply the principles of rhetorical appeals in action. I gave them a hypothetical scenario where I wanted them to speak to the school leadership team about whether or not they feel cell phone policies should be revised in public schools. And I laid out the question here. I said the SLT is holding a virtual town hall. You can read it for yourself. They had to come up with a proposal and they had to employ the principles of rhetoric that we had talked about and explored in the unit. And so they had to speak, they had 2 minutes maximum, and they had to speak to their given audience and use appropriate emphasis on logos, ethos, and pathos to make their pitch. So it provided me an opportunity and provides me an opportunity to see how well students can apply the information that they've learned. This could happen in a math class where a student is asked to explain a proof or explain a concept or explain a problem being solved. It could be done in a science lab where rather than having students simply write the information down or fill out a document, you have them present their findings orally and verbally via FlipGrid. It could be done in a history class. We ask them to present or possibly summarize the aspects of a lecture or a mini lesson that you possibly touched on in class. It's another way to be a closure activity for your students. So that's two ways that you can use a Flexit or a FlipGrid as an exit activity. One, as a way to hold students accountable for what you're asking them to do offline. And two, a way to assess students and measure their growth and progress on what you've already taught and explored by having them present their findings, give a presentation, explain a problem, discuss a concept. You're all creative. There are many other ways out there that you're already using FlipGrid. I'd love to hear about them. And maybe if you've never used FlipGrid, it's something you might want to start exploring in this Flexit mentality, a way to be a closure activity that's different than simply having them write something or struggling to find some secure way to assess them. As always, if you have questions about this, I'm more than willing to speak to you about it. Feel free to stop by room 139. Feel free to use our PCT support ticket to reach out to us. And I hope you give FlipGrid a chance if you haven't yet and catch a little bit of the FlipGrid fever and maybe even explore my silly acronym or silly idea of Flexit to be a closure activity. Feel free to hit me up anytime if you want to talk about this. I look forward to seeing you. Have a great weekend.